this plus ChatGPT will turbocharge your marketing results. So I'm going to give an overview of our process into a little more detail here so you can copy the same thing. But what we're doing right now, we're recording this podcast and then we're layering on transcripts from riverside.fm because it automatically will make the transcripts. And so this is basically our process for taking our pillar piece of content and using ChatGPT to multiply it. So going back to the process again, you have our video or podcast being recorded right now, and then we're making it a transcript. And then we're telling ChatGPT, we're saying, hey, go ahead and make this into a blog post, give us the key points, or make this into a tweet storm, or make this into a LinkedIn post. And then afterwards, we will have our human editors come in and fulfill the last mile. So they will just double check through duplicate content checkers if the content is legit. They're going to add in some links there. They're going to add in some statistics, some trends. They're going to add in like a nice blog image too. And then you're going to have a fully fleshed out blog post. And so this has been increasing our kind of output or decreasing the time it takes to pump out one blog post by about 75 to 80% or so. And it looks really good. So our point of saying all this is not to say follow our exact process. I'm just giving you some ideas here. But this ChatGPT, if you take your pillar piece of content, wherever else you're producing content right now, and you layer it on with ChatGPT, you're going to be able to get a lot more mileage from your content. That's the key point to start off with.
You can also do a few other things with ChatGPT, right? You could take your text-based blog post, tell them to turn it into a tweet storm. You can do things like taking your video-based transcripts and tell them to turn it into bite-sized text-based content for LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter as well, where you can end up posting. The thing that I like to end up doing is I like to end up taking my blog post, tell them to summarize it and end up taking that summary, then put it on LinkedIn or Facebook and then link out to the actual blog post. So then I can drive more traffic from social to my actual website.
Cool. You know what? And I totally realized I whiffed on this one. So you got the process from us, but here's what I really wanted to talk about. So HubSpot, I don't know if you saw this, Neil, but HubSpot actually just came out with the Dharmesh produced ChatSpot.ai. What that is, it looks like you've seen it. So HubSpot basically is they're releasing something where you can connect with your CRM and you can connect with Google Sheets and you can just start to ask it questions like, hey, who are our best sales reps? What locations are our best leads coming from right now? How much did we close in the last week or so? How's the lead flow like trending upwards or downwards? Who are the best SaaS companies we should talk to? And so our sales and marketing teams should be able to move a lot faster. So what are your thoughts on that? So we gave you a process. This is a little bonus over here.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. The one thing I'm concerned about with ChatGPT is when you start feeding it all this data and then think of it as like a modern version of Siri that just helps you summarize, analyze the data and giving you answers. My big fear right now is what data do they have and what are they using it with in the future? The reason this is super important is let's say you're importing in your sales numbers and revenue numbers and data about sales reps. You don't want other people to have this data. And for me, at least right now, it's not clear on what they're doing with that data because supposedly they're trying to use it all to make ChatGPT better.
From my understanding, Neil, so I watched the video with Dharmesh. It's like a 20-minute video, and he said they will not be feeding this information to them. And I think OpenAI has also said that if you are using the API, they will not use that data. And so that's been established at some point. So I think that's a fair point, but I read that somewhere.
Yeah, but I saw the same thing from Sam Altman, which they're not going to end up using the data, but are they still storing it? That's the part I don't know about. Because if they're storing it, what happens if they change their mind in the future?
Yeah, that's a good point, but I think I would assume, and this is just an assumption, that if you're saying you're not going to use the data, you're not going to store it as well, but there's a big difference there. So we'll have to wait and see. But until then, I think we're probably going to play around with it. So it's chatspot.ai. You can also swipe our process as well if you want to double and triple down on your content. But I think you're going to be able to, ultimately what this just means across the board, a key takeaway is you're just going to save a lot more time at the end of the day. At least I think that's the premise of AI, and we're excited about what's to come. We want to talk about how to take accountability on your marketing screw up. So Neil and I are both going to share some stories here. I'm going to start off with one first, and then I'll let Neil choose which story he would like to share because we've all screwed up many times on marketing. So one for me is when I used to work at a startup. I was leading marketing at a startup a long time ago. This is like got to be 13 years ago or something like that. And so what had happened was our goal was to acquire more users for this online education startup. And we were, at the time, I believe when I first started, we were acquiring like 500 users a month. And then after the first month, I think it got it up 1,500 or 2,000 a month or so. So pretty significant bump. But I wanted more growth, and that was what I was tasked with. And there was a deal company that reached out called AppSumo. And so AppSumo reached out. They do software deals. They try to run. They'll say, hey, maybe you sell your software for $100. We'll sell it to our audience for $20 or so, but you're going to get a lot more customers in return. So you're going to get a lot more volume. And so I was like, oh yeah, sounds good. And so I ended up doing the deal and ended up being their most successful deal ever. I think at the time, it's like they did $150,000 in a day or something like that. What I didn't do is I didn't tell the broader team. I didn't tell customer service. And that day, the avalanche of customers just came in. And I remember Chamath Palihapitiya was actually one of the investors too. And so what had happened was it got all the way up to the VCs. It's like this marketing guy ran this deal, and basically our entire staff is inundated right now. And I remember the CTO even sent me a Slack message, or I think we're using Slack or HipChat or something. And the CTO just in one sentence said, "You just ruined everyone's day, period." And at that point, I was just really sad. I was devastated. But even in the VC thread where everyone was included, Chamath was in there too. I was like, hey guys, like this is on me. I should have been upfront. I should have told people, but I just didn't want to put more of a burden on other people. And I'm sorry for doing that. And Chamath actually responded and he said, it's good to take shots and it's good to take accountability. We move on, right? Something like that. And at the end of the day, like there are going to be screw ups. We're going to take shots on things. Most of your experiments aren't going to work, but it's really important that you stay humble and you're open to receiving feedback and you quickly own up to your mistakes and you make up for it.
Yeah, I had one recently in which we ran a webinar, and when we run webinar, we use other people's content. Like when there's data and stats that other people are presenting, we'll use it. So I remember we were doing a webinar related to AI, and there's this gentleman named Eddie. We ended up using some of his data. We put his face on the webinar slide. We put his full name, linked out to him, his company name. So in essence, we were citing him and giving him credit for his own work, which is all fine and dandy. And my team ended up sending out an email blast. They took some of the copy from the webinar and they didn't cite him in the email blast. They cited him in the webinar, but they didn't cite him in the email blast, which is not okay. And I didn't end up finding out about it until it went on Twitter. And then someone ended up showing it to me, got probably 1,000+ likes. I don't know how many. And people are like, what do you want to end up doing? And I was like, well, it's our fault, right? It doesn't matter if it's my team or someone else. At the end of the day, marketing ends up rolling up to me. So at the end of the day, it's my fault. And all you can do is really own up to it. And we said, sorry, we should have never done it. It's not okay. It's not cool one bit. There's no excuses. And what we did internally is, of course, we ran our own process internally on what we wanted to do, brought in HR, etc. And then from there, from a marketing standpoint, we ended up creating processes so hopefully this never happens again. So it's like whether you're sending out an email blast or citing something in a blog post, anytime you're using someone else's data, we end up creating a checklist. All right, did you mention the person's name? Did you mention the company's name? Did you link out to them? So we end up creating a checklist in hopes to prevent this mistake from ever happening again. But all you can end up doing is the easiest thing is to take ownership or accountability for what went wrong and then creating systems and procedures to stop that mistake happening from again. Because in marketing, the sad reality is you're going to keep making more mistakes. And if you make mistakes, it sucks. And some of them are really bad mistakes, like the one I made or one Eric made. All you can do is apologize, take ownership for it and accountability, set up systems and procedures to avoid that same mistake over and over again. And then whoever you affected, you ideally want to reach out to that person or persons and apologize to them. For example, Eric took ownership, apologized to the investors who were on the Slack group, the team members, the executives whose day, quote unquote, he in essence ruined, right? I apologize to people publicly on LinkedIn, and I apologize to the person directly on LinkedIn as well. And all you can do is take ownership. You can't go back in time, sadly, and prevent what you did. But going forward, you could try to avoid the same screw up over and over again. And here's the key. If you keep avoiding screw ups and you create systems and processes, so then that way in the future you're going to be better off, eventually you'll spend your time on the stuff that you should be doing and that will move the needle in the correct way.
Yep. And I'm actually going to show a live example. Those of you that subscribe to us on YouTube, hint, hint. So Eddie actually messaged me about this, right? So Eddie and I are on good terms. I think he's a great copywriter. So he reached out. He's like, what do you think about this? And I was like, oh, interesting copy, right? So I actually clicked on the link and I had no idea it was going to be this. And this is what happens here. He creates like a steel Patel or something around it, which I think is funny. And so, what ends up happening is this gets like a lot of engagement, but the very first comment that has a lot of engagement here is actually Neil's, right? And so Neil's here, 235. As much as whatever other people were saying here, the first thing that Neil said was, I'm sorry about this, right? And at the end of the day, he was like, the buck starts and stops with me. It doesn't matter if it's someone else on my team that starts with me. I'm going to fix this. And he took full accountability there, right? It's not, oh, my team did it. It's not me. I'm so sorry. We're going to get into it. It's like, no, like it's on me at the end of the day. And I think most people are unwilling to take accountability and are unwilling to apologize. But here's the thing. It's actually free to apologize and it doesn't hurt your ego at all. And if you're not willing to take accountability, that shows you probably have more of an ego problem than anything. So that's just my 2 cents. That's how you take accountability.
Keep in mind, apology won't fix things. In marketing, you got to set up the right systems and procedures to make sure it doesn't happen again. And some people may accept your apology. Some people may not. That's okay. But you still need to do what's right, even if people are still upset at you. And you need to create the systems and procedures so those mistakes don't continually happen again and again.
For context for everyone too, I did message Eddie afterwards and show him a screenshot that actually shows where he was cited. And he did respond and he said, I'm grateful for it. And I was like, look, I'm just showing you that you don't need to take down the post or whatever. Like, I get why you might keep the post up because you got good reach on that one. So do what you do. And so that is it for today. I really don't think he has any ill will to anyone. So we're going to talk about whether you should build or buy when it comes to talent. Now, before anyone gets upset, I remember I was sitting in a car. Neil and I, we had a mutual friend. I was in a car with the CEO. I was in Texas. And he's, yeah, we should build or buy. And at the time, I was like, I think I was like 26 or 27 years old. I was like, how could you say that about people? But he was just oversimplifying and saying that like when you build talent, you are building them up, right? Let's say you're building an intern up and maybe you're training someone up that hasn't necessarily been in the role before, but you think they have the potential to do. Or you can buy talent where they have basically been there, done that, and you could acqui-hire a company too, right? So there's two schools of thought here. And Neil has very much taken another approach where I've taken another approach, but I've learned my lesson over the years.
Or let's rephrase. Eric, what approach have you taken over the years?
I'd say the majority of what I've done over the years is I've tried to build up talent.
Yeah, and when he's saying build up talent, he's hiring people and he's trying to train them into the roles that he wants them to succeed in and accomplish within the organization. And there's no right or wrong approach. I've taken the other approach in which, especially in marketing or even in just business and leadership, I tend to take the route of hiring the talent that has already done it before because you end up learning from them, you end up moving faster, and they prevent you from making a lot of the mistakes that you would have made on your own. And it doesn't mean that you can't build. I would say for more entry positions, you have to end up building, and we do that all the time. But for leadership, whether it's in marketing or operations or finance, we always hire the existing talent. Now, the one thing we very rarely ever do, and I don't like doing this, even though I'm willing to hire the talent, I'm not willing to buy a company with the talent. I hate that model. And I know a lot of people do that, and it has worked well for a lot of big corporations. But my fear with buying a company that has a talent that you don't and then integrating them, if the culture and everything is not 100% alignment, you're going to end up losing a lot of that talent. And then you're going to have to go hire and rebuild. So for that reason, I don't like for companies or buying companies purely for their talent. I'd rather just hire the people directly and give the money to the individuals versus the corporations.
Yep. And I'll share a story here. Over the years, for very senior roles, we hired people that had the potential. So they were successful in another role, but they had not been there, done that. And so what I've learned over the years is probably the best recruiting book that I've ever read is Who. It's WHO with a question mark. And it talks about the scorecard. So it talks about defining a scorecard, right? So I talk about this quite a bit. It's what do you want to achieve? And let's say you want to hire a CEO that has actually built like a $100 million agency before or help build one, right? Then you're just going to put that in there. Built and manage a $100 million P&L. And they've also hired an executive team behind that, right? So you have to define the top kind of 3 to 5 outcomes that you're looking for. And then you have to define the capabilities that you're looking for as well. But even beyond that, there's this whole concept of top grading, right? And so let's say I'm interviewing with Neil. I can crush an interview pretty easily, just like Neil can just talk through an interview, right? But what really matters at the end of the day is who Neil has actually worked with or who I've actually worked with. And more importantly, who the manager has been, right? So whoever has managed this person in the past, I want to talk to those people, the last 3 or 4 or so, and just get a sense for what the real excitement is. Because you can generally sense the energy probably in the first couple minutes or so. I know if my and I'll say this for most people too, your intuition's probably right in the first 5 to 10 minutes or so. You just know, right? And that's almost never failed me. I'm trying to think of a situation where it has. It might have failed me later, but out the gate, that intuition has always worked. So my point of saying all this again is when we hire people, same thing for Neil too. When we've hired people that have been there, done that, when we hired people that have won championships or the people that are gold medalists, it just makes things a lot easier because it's much more of a situation where they will come in, they'll try to understand your culture, and then they're just going to start to implement. And you don't need to tell them what to do. And you don't need to feel like you need to keep looking behind your shoulders all the time, because that's what starts to cause a lot of drag. You need to go focus on what you're actually good at. And you're hiring people to take things off your plate so you can get more leverage in the company. To Neil's point again, if they're more junior level, you can afford to take more risk there. If they're more senior, you actually can't afford to take more risk. And this is actually a document I want to show you real quick. So this chart over here is actually done by Keith Raboy. So he's a VC. He's been part of Square, been a part of PayPal and these other companies. So on the very bottom over here of this chart, those of you that are just listening, so you can see on this is the x-axis over here. This is the consequence of a decision. Okay. Now on the y-axis, this is your level of conviction. What this chart basically says is the higher the risk of a particular role, and the more conviction you have with it, the more you actually need to come in and micromanage. So I'm actually talking about something that's a little different right now. If you are going to be building talent, you might have to micromanage a little more. If you are buying talent, you're going to have to micromanage a little less. I've talked about this with Neil like a couple weeks ago, still a couple percent at a time, 5, 10, maybe 15% at a time, you still might have to jump in and just make sure that things are going on track. So that's a little bonus for you. Anything else, Neil?
Yeah, on my end, one thing that I've learned over the years is as your company grows and you end up taking on debt, some of the banks actually require that if you're doing M&A and there's talent there, that they have some sort of say in the talent and what you end up pushing out or their comp and stuff like that, because they understand the value of talent. So it just shows, right? It's if you're buying talent or companies for their talent, you need to be really careful on what you're doing. And even the banks see that as a quote unquote potential risk. The other thing to just keep in mind is if you're really trying to grow, you're just better off hiring talent who's already done it that you don't have to end up training up. And they better have direct industry experience. If they don't have direct industry experience and pushing them from one sector to another, it doesn't usually transfer the way you're going to think.
And Neil and I have talked about this in the past too. You want to hire people that have been promoted a couple of times too. So we've actually done that where, let's say we wanted someone to be let's say like a SEO director, right? What had happened was we would hire people that have been promoted into senior SEO manager, all right? But they haven't really been an SEO director before. And so director for us means actually managing people and actually growing people, growing talent, but they hadn't actually been there, done that. And so it actually was a scenario where we thought we were buying, but it turns out we were actually building. And so this requires a lot of due diligence up front. And so really recommend, again, reading the book Who, that's WHO with a question mark, and then learning how to top grade. And that's going to move things through a lot faster. So that is it for today. Please don't forget to rate, review, subscribe. Also subscribe to us on YouTube. And those of you that rate, review, subscribe, leave your email on the pod, and we're going to pick one person to come and ask a question, and we'll do that periodically to keep the train moving. So that's it for today, and we'll see you tomorrow.